Hello and welcome to Trapped in History. This is episode number 30. I am your host, Robbie Malcomson, and I am honored tonight to be joined with a fellow educator. And I can't wait to get into talking to him. And I've gotten to get to know him here the last few months since June. But tonight's episode is going to be called A Conversation with Educator Keith Mainland. Keith, it is wonderful to have you onto the show.
I really appreciate you inviting me.
And like I said, I know just for the listeners, for a little bit of a background, I know Keith will get into this. Keith and I both teach the same course. He's taught it longer, and I have no doubt much better than I have. But I've taught AP History for my 6th year now, and Keith will get into that later. But Keith is also an AP European History teacher as well. So Keith, if you're okay with it, I feel like to give our listeners a nice background for you and where you're from and whatnot. Can you start us all by describing where you're from?
Well, as you can tell, I ain't from round here. British originally. Now, it's important to understand, I'm hoping that your listeners know the difference between British and English. If you don't and you call somebody English when they're not, they might punch you in the mouth. The Scots and the Irish in particular are going to get pretty upset if you call them English. So I am British. My mother is Scottish. My father is English. And I moved to America 40 years ago, actually 42 at this point. So,
hey, a follow-up question for you, Keith, is do you remember necessarily like how you felt when you first moved over here, when you and your family moved over?
It was weird. I moved to Atlanta. My mother had gone to school there in the 1950s, and she felt this was the land of opportunity. You know, streets are paved with gold, very deep.
Yeah.
And so moving here in March of 1982, my mother is one of those punny people. So we marched forth on March 4th. And so I arrived in Atlanta. My brother was young enough to be able to enter high school. My mother started work. So I spent the first 3 months or so pretty much on my own. You know, I had no friends, no nothing. I did not have a good time. The only thing I knew I needed / wanted to do was try and play soccer in college. So I started looking for universities, colleges that I might be able to go play for. Tried out at a couple, was offered a couple of scholarships, but it was never enough to really cover what I needed. And I ended up at Georgia State University in downtown Atlanta, a commuter school. So I had no living expenses. I lived at home and played 4 years of D1 soccer, got a degree in journalism.
I think that's another great American success story there. But I have to hand it to you. You had to really take the initiative on your own. Did you feel like, I don't know that this question makes sense. Did you have to? How did you motivate yourself to do that? Is it just because you were in a situation where you just had to, like you had to take initiative on your own, or for a long time did you already have that instilled in you?
Well, I had planned on going to university in the UK, took A levels, and had the opportunity to go to Warwick University to study history. But because the visa requirements from the United States say you get your green card and your work visa and stuff, you got 3 months to use it. So we had to sort of wait and put things off until it was, yes, you're going, or no, you're not. And so once we got the okay, that was in December of 1981. And we moved, as I said, in March of 1982.
Wow. Well, you said you ended up going to Georgia State playing D1 soccer, which is already impressive enough. Do you mind telling us what was your degree in while you attended Georgia State?
I got a degree in broadcast journalism and a minor in history. I'd been told by people that I looked up to that you couldn't make enough money being a teacher. And so I went the journalism route, and it was okay. I enjoyed it. I should have gone to work for ESPN, but didn't.
Mhm.
Went to work for the wrong cable company. I went to work for CNN instead.
Yeah.
And it was overnight copy editing and writing and all of that kind of stuff. And it just wasn't for me. I didn't enjoy it. And I put up with it for almost 6 years. And it reached a point where I was just like, I got to do something that I want to do. And teaching was it.
Now, do you mind telling the listeners, like, I'm kind of curious, how were you able to bridge what you were doing into teaching? Because I think the broadcasting journalism part, you have the voice, you have the charisma, the attitude to definitely be able to transition over to that. I'm sure a sense of humor as well too, as we've seen. But you know, how did you decide on teaching? Like, to go from that particular major to that one, was it a fact that you wanted to work with other people and kind of a mentor sort of role, or was it something else?
It was something else. Teaching was what I'd always wanted to do. From the time, from as early as I can remember, I planned on teaching when I was in the UK. And, like I said, the people that see money as the motivation advised me otherwise. I gave it a shot. It may not have been a wholehearted shot, to be honest,
Mhm.
but when push came to shove, teaching's what I love. And when you do something God, it's cliche. When you do something you love, you never work a day in your life. I tell my kids every day, if you tell anyone that I like what I'm doing, I will flunk you. I've got a reputation to uphold. I'm a grump. So
Well, so what about your teaching experience? So you made that transition into that, and how long have you been teaching? What has that experience been like for you?
mixed. So I got my teaching certification, managed to get a job in Georgia, working in DeKalb County, Georgia. It was, just to give you some history, the last county in the US to comply with Brown versus Board of Education.
Hmm.
Yeah. So
Wow.
I taught at a black high school on the edge of downtown. It was rough and tumble. We had a 50% dropout rate. It was about kids surviving more than it was learning anything that I was trying to teach them. My wife, who had lived in Atlanta her whole life, got a wild hair and said, let's move to Colorado. So we did, because you're married. If your wife
Yeah,
says
yeah,
you're going to do something.
yeah. That's the boss request. So
Yes.
you're gonna.
Yeah. I was voluntold. So we moved out, and I didn't get a teaching job for the first few years I was here. My wife actually worked for the school district, and she's the one that got me in.
Mhm.
I served a year of middle school, words chosen precisely, because yeah, blessings on
Yeah.
those of you who teach middle
Yes, yeah.
school.
I did student teaching in middle school, but so I wasn't doing middle school for long.
Yeah, I did 1 year. And then I went to work at summer school, and it was literally to make contacts, which I was fortunate enough to do. Boulder Valley School District here in Colorado was opening its first high school in almost 25 years. And one of the women that was getting her principal's license was best friends with the social studies department chair. And so she liked me, and I got an interview and was hired quite literally the day before school started.
Oh
And I
my
have
goodness.
been at Monarch ever since. So from the fall of 1998 through the present. It's been a wonderful experience, a complete contrast to what I had in DeKalb. I wouldn't give up that experience, because if you can handle DeKalb County schools, you can handle anything. And I mean that quite
Yeah.
sincerely. It
Oh
was a
yeah.
fantastic experience, hard, but good. And so now I'm being just loving what I do. I've got
Mhm.
great kids. I've got a fantastic department that I work with. Wouldn't trade any of them for anything.
I'll tell you what, I can echo that because I've been at the same school now for this is my 16th year. And this is the first school that I ever taught at. And I've been there the whole time. And I'm from Indiana originally, and I got hired down here in Southern Kentucky. We're about an hour from Nashville. And, but I'll tell you, the biggest thing is I've had moments in my career where I've thought about leaving or I've had interviews at other places, but it's hard to leave a department that is so good. Like you work with really good people. It helps a lot. The kids have always been great, but having coworkers and colleagues and friends that are very supportive of you too, that makes a huge difference. And I have no doubt that that's played probably a small or significant role in you staying at Monarch.
Absolutely. You know, when you go to work and you know the people that you work with are professional, they're hardworking, they are dedicated to getting the best out of the kids, and it's just a fabulous experience. I've been in the same room for nigh on 30 years now.
Yeah. Well, hey, that move from Georgia to Colorado is almost like you were ready for that kind of a adjustment because you had to assimilate when you moved over from Britain, and then you had to get used to being in that other school system. So you kind of train yourself in a way to adjust. Do you mind if I ask? Whenever you first moved up to Colorado, you said for a few years there you weren't teaching it. So what were you doing before you started to have that first teaching and networking opportunity?
Yeah. Okay. So
I always ask this because I get a kick out of the jobs that all of us teachers used to do before teaching or between teaching.
So
I think you could say a lot about a person.
I had a job when I was in college working for a law firm, doing accounting for a law firm, billing hours and writing bills and all of that sort of stuff. So when I got here, I took an accounting job working for, of all places, Pearl Izumi, the bicycle high-tech wear company. It was headquartered here, and so I worked for them. Then I went to work at a company called Corporate Express, also accounting. And it was, so I put in 4 years of accounting work doing numbers. And as my students will tell you, no hablo math. There's a reason I teach social studies.
Yeah.
And so, then I was lucky enough to have my wife said, there's a job opening. A teacher at a middle school is quitting because she can't handle the kids. Do you want the job? I'm like, yes. She's like, okay. So we jumped in with both feet, and I taught 8th grade health and 8th grade options, I guess it was. So they were doing sort of this. You spent 1/3 of the year doing PE, 1/3 doing foods, and foods was the replacement. So I did a class on current affairs for 8th graders. And we just talked about social studies stuff, what was going on in the world, the history behind it, why things were the way they are. And it was just a mass discussion class. And I'm still in touch with maybe 6 of the kids that went through that course with me, all turning 40 this year.
Yeah. Wow. My first students are turning 30 this year, which already makes me feel to have that. That's another thing that gravitated me to your teaching style is that you're also a discussion-based teacher.
Yes.
So, and you see me post on AP Euro's classroom. Like I do a lot of Socratic seminars and discussion and debating. And I try to treat my class more like group therapy than I do a traditional classroom. From time to time, there's a lot of me sitting with them and having that dialogue back and forth. And I look forward to digging a little bit deeper into that here in a little bit. To give people a little bit more context on your teaching experience, what did you teach early on at Monarch, and what are you teaching now currently?
Okay, so when we opened, we only had freshmen and sophomores. So I taught geography. I did not teach U.S. government and world history. So it was geography and world history. I'm still teaching the world history course. Fortunately, we have geography people that have taken over. And then I jumped into AP World History in about 2003. And I taught that for 3 years. And then the AP Euro teacher left. And so I gobbled that one up. So there were kids that I had for both AP World and AP Euro. So AP World is a sophomore class for my district. AP Euro is a senior elective.
Wow.
So I have all seniors in my class who all theoretically want to be there. So they say.
So they say. Well, that's great. And then just kind of going into your coaching now too, because I know you played Division I soccer at Georgia State.
Yeah.
How has that translated over to your experience at Monarch?
Well, I was fortunate enough. That was part of the reason I was hired. They needed a soccer coach. I was hired as that first. And so that was not my first coaching experience. My college assistant coach ran a club. And so he and I coached together for 7 or 8 years before I branched off onto my own and started coaching some teams. And then, I played for years until my knees said, you can't play anymore. I've been lucky enough to play with alumni who have organized teams, and I played with them, and it's just, soccer's been a marvelous part of my teaching career, because that's what coaching is. It's relating to the kids, figuring out ways of imparting information so that they can improve themselves.
I think you just answered my organic follow-up question, because I was going to ask you, have you noticed any parallels between coaching and the teaching in the classroom? But I think you hit the nail on the head with the very end of your answer. Well, but I didn't know if you wanted to add anything to that. Is there any other similarities? I mean, over the years, I think you said you've coached for 11 or 12 years in soccer. For you, have you noticed any? I don't know, like whether it's advice for teachers or just parallels in general that have translated over, stuff that you've done in the classroom has translated over to coaching, and maybe vice versa, where things that you've learned in coaching have translated over to you in the classroom?
I was very much a disciplinarian early on in my coaching. It was very important to be fit and do this and do that and do the other.
Yeah.
And what I'm finding is that if you run the right drills and do the right things, you don't have to do running as a separate entity. And what I find is that when I'm teaching skills, the practicing of them develops them organically. You don't have to sit down and break down stuff. Now, again, I've got the advantage. I'm teaching AP Euro to seniors, who most of whom have this is their third history class. And now that they're all the styles, question-based ideas are the same, I don't have to teach them as much how to answer questions. We can work on, okay, here are the types of things you need to think about within your answer. And I always say, look, if you write a short answer question, for example, and I have to write, wait, who or what or how, then you haven't finished answering the question.
Yep. That's a good way to put it. I need to consider that myself, because we're working pretty hard on SAQs right now in our class. I'm trying to weave that in as more of a regular kind of skill thing that we work on. And I think that's another great way, because you and I both feel the same about feedback. And I know we're going to get into that later towards the end of the show about how important feedback is, and dynamic feedback, and giving them. But to wrap up your background, I think that, this helps me a lot, because as you know, I just recently became a father. So I'm a 40-year-old new father. So I have a little daughter that's 3 months old. But I'm curious for you. I'd like to know your family background for the audience, but also any advice that you have at balancing being the best father and husband that you can be, and teacher and coach at the same time. How have you done that over the years, and what are some of your successes and pitfalls along the way?
Wow.
Sorry for the compound question. I should have broke that down. I kind of got Got a little
Yeah.
ahead of myself there.
That's fine. So my son was born in October of 98, and I started teaching at Monarch in August of 98. So he was literally born into my coaching and teaching career here in Colorado. Um, and so it was hard. Fortunately, my wife ran her own consulting business, and so she was able to work from home early on. So there was a lot less sort of, oh my God, I got to get back and I've got to do this and she was
Yeah.
built in around all of that sort of stuff. And that's a big part of it. You gotta recognize that being a parent is a team effort. Is this your first child?
Yes. So it's going to be our first and only child.
Oh, okay. See, and that was going to be my next piece of advice. Never be outnumbered. You got to be able to play man to man. Zone
Yeah.
defense just doesn't work with children.
Yeah.
And so we had a second 4 years later. And by that point, we sort of had a rhythm going and it was relatively easy. And so we got to the class of 09 was my last year of coaching because both my kids were reaching a point where they were starting to play their own sports. And I wanted to be able to be a part of that. I didn't want to coach them.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be able to go watch and be a good father. And so there was never any pressure on them to play sports particularly. They inherited the genes. My wife was a D1 basketball player. I played soccer, so they were sort of given that talent. And
they got ingratiated into that early.
yes, and so my son never played soccer a day in his life. He played the American sports. He played football, baseball, basketball. My daughter did play soccer, but quit when she was a freshman in high school and started running. And she got a scholarship to New Mexico State to run cross country and track. Unfortunately for her, she was class of 2020.
Oh,
So,
man.
yeah. So,
right there at the COVID. Yep.
Yep. She lost her senior track season and lost all motivation to do anything. She went to New Mexico, but it was 3 months of misery,
Oh, I
literally
imagine.
by herself in her room with no friends. She didn't know anyone, online classes. And she just said, I can't do this. I'm coming home. And
Yeah.
so she left. But, it's good. You've got to have a partnership. If you're going to coach and teach and be a good parent, it has to be a team effort. You have to have the right spouse that's going to accept the fact that for some of the time she's going to be, in my case, a soccer widow. And I'm gone for 3 months, basically. Almost every night I'm coaching till dark, and then game nights I'm gone later. But after that, you got to make up that time. You've got to get back and be the parent to your own kids, not to other kids.
Yeah. Well, and another thing to give you credit for, and maybe I misunderstood this earlier, that first year your son was born, didn't you say earlier that you also got hired the day before school started?
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay, how did you find any time to plan on what you were going to do? Was that one of those years you're kind of building it and flying it at the same time?
And then some.
And
So
then
I was hired, and like I said, I taught 2 geography classes and 1 world history class. That was 3 of the 5 classes I taught. Ready for this? So this plays into your stereotypes. The principal decided that because I was English and had an English accent, it would only make sense that I taught language arts. So the first 2 years I taught language arts. Now, I never met or talked with anyone in the language arts department about what I was teaching.
Wow.
I just winged it. And I mean winged it. I taught, I taught what am I saying? To Kill a Mockingbird. I taught Romeo and Juliet. And I taught a social studies book, which I loved, called Afro Boy, about apartheid in South Africa.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of it.
And yeah, I literally flying by the seat of my pants, just, okay, let's do this, let's do that, let's do the other. So.
And, you had talked to me a little bit before about teacher burnout and things like that could cause it. When you think back at it, without the resilience that you had early in your career, like your first experience there in Atlanta, and then also being kind of thrusted into the situation there, I think just showed you how passionate you were about teaching in general, because, for some teachers that may have burned them out. Like they may have not lasted that after that first year or second year or third year, but I can definitely tell you love teaching, but back then that love must have also been one of those many things that encourages you to kind of persevere through these experiences of teaching that are not ideal. Like you would rather be teaching history and social studies, which eventually that opportunity comes. But you did have to go through some growing pains there and getting through some very unique situations along the way.
Yeah, but as you said, if it's something you like doing, if you like being with the kids and watching those light bulb moments and seeing them start to enjoy classes, then that's what it's all about. I've been fortunate enough to have several really good student teachers, and I like to think I'm a decent mentor. And I always impart the same piece of advice that was imparted to me when I was student teaching in Atlanta. And that was one of the biggest reasons for burnout is teachers want to be Mr. Keating, Mr. Holland. They want to be these movie teachers that have a huge impact on every kid. Mm-hmm. And what this teacher told me is your job isn't to reach every kid, it's to reach one kid. If you can reach one kid, you have done your job. If you try and reach them all, you are going to burn out. You can't reach 155 kids. There's just no way. I'm being optimistic saying 155.
Yeah.
But if you make a difference in one kid's life, if one kid says to you at some point way down the road, hey, remember when you did this, or you get a letter or an email out of the blue that says, I just thought I'd let you know that you made a difference. That's your moments.
Yeah.
The other piece of advice that I give all my student teachers is anytime you get something from a kid that says, hey, love this class, or they draw a cartoon caricature of you, or they send you a postcard from a vacation spot that you mentioned in class, keep those. Have a file of those moments, because there'll be days when you go, why am I doing this? And that's the moment you reach into that file and pull out a postcard or a drawing or something that says, hey, you helped me through a moment. This is me helping you through a moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And Keith, I had one of those moments recently that makes me think like hardly anything's better than those moments when you hear a message back from former students. And I have this cheesy lunchbox in my room, like a Bazinga Big Bang Theory lunchbox. And I just had an idea that any kind of message or card or anything that I received from a student, I just kept putting it in there through the years. And now it's so full, I can't shut it. So I had to like move it over to some other kind of box. And that always makes me think, in 15 years, I've been able to have And it's like you said earlier too, or at least on your other messages to me, that sometimes you have those impacts with kids, but you may never hear it. Like you may never necessarily get that feedback from that kid, but nonetheless you had that impact on them. But I tell you what, you hit the nail on the head. I had one of those moments this year where I was having second thoughts again, because every once in a while that happens, and I'll just pull something like that out, or every once in a while I'll get a random email from a former student that will kind of hit that. So I appreciate you sharing that. For sure, it means a lot. Now I know I'm a big avid follower of philosophy, so I'd love to dive in to some philosophy questions with you if you're good with that.
Go.
So I have to know, Keith. Like, I mean, we all have our inspirations, and you're obviously an inspired teacher, a very good teacher. What ultimately inspired you, Keith Mainland, to start teaching history?
History to me matters. I saw you. I know you posted a question on a little chat and asking about the importance. And I fed you back a quote from a student of mine that just said, "Hey, today is tomorrow's history." And I think that's such a great encapsulating idea about why history matters, because everything that we are is a direct result of everything that has happened before. And if you don't know what's happened before, how can you know why you are the way you are, or why we are the way we are, or why the world is the way it is? And so that's the sort of stuff that was inspiring to me. And we chatted earlier, and I've already mentioned I'm a huge movie buff. I use movies in my classes all the time. And the more I use them, the older I feel, because I reference stuff and they have no idea what movie that's from.
I feel that.
But the movie that literally changed my life was Dead Poets Society. It was so inspirational to see a teacher challenging kids to think differently about stuff. And you can't just go through life accepting everything and accepting everyone's opinion of you. You have to you have to forge your own destiny. And it's very cliche, but that's what I love doing. That's why I said, you see these light bulb moments when a kid goes, "Oh, I never thought of that," or "Wow, that's a cool story," or they'll I'm a blood and guts guy, and so
me too.
the tortures and all of that sort of stuff, and so you make jokes about things, and it just, you're watching the kids suddenly become interested in things that possibly they never had any clue about before you mentioned it.
I mean, that's great. Like I said, I'm with you as well too. I really feel like when I posted that question the other day on the group chat thing, I was just thinking to myself, it's like, to me, I don't know how history can matter to people, because I feel like it's part of the fabric of who we are. Like, to me, I feel like in a way, it gets us ready to be who I think we're meant to be, like, or at least to be who society needs us to be, like where we're supposed to be critical thinkers and have questioning attitudes. And it's it's actually one of the reasons why I love starting with the Renaissance so much in AP Euro, because right away we're into humanism and individualism, and you bring up that questioning attitude thing, and it's such an easy segue into talking about the students' lives and giving them a chance to kind of exercise their thoughts on that. So I think it's a wonderful line to hear as far as your inspiration. Now, as far as your teaching philosophy, I know that's kind of a cheesier thing to ask, because I know we've had to answer that in college. We've had people ask this before, like, what's your pedagogy? What's your philosophy on that? But for you, I'm more interested in the evolution, because going back to what you just said earlier, putting into words what you and I have experienced as teachers, it gets difficult sometimes, because I've had multiple student teachers too, and I'd like to think that I do well as a mentor as well, as you said earlier. But it's just one of those things that it's hard to sit there and theorize, because you can theorize all day long about what you want to be like as a teacher, but you just really don't know until you go through it. And you just have to make yourself go through that experience and experience those highs and those lows, and you just gain wisdom from that. And that being said, that's what leads me perfectly to this next question of how has your teaching philosophy evolved over the years through all the ups and downs that you've gone through? How has it changed?
Phew. I think if I was examined by the powers that be in university that teach teachers, they would say, don't teach like him. Because I am a firm believer in, yes, you can encourage kids to learn on their own, but I really believe that history is one of those subjects that until you know what's important, how are you going to be able to learn more about it? You know, I've tried doing this. Here are the topics for the French Revolution. Go out and come back and we'll do a presentation on. And they flounder. And so I consider myself a storyteller. And so I do a lot of teacher driven stuff, let's say.
Yeah.
But part of it is, okay, look at this image. What do you see? How does that tell you a story about? What are you looking at? And once kids start to get the hang of how to answer questions, then the teaching style becomes much more back and forth. But like I say, I believe that lecture isn't exactly what I do, but it's definitely a big part. And so much of student teaching now is, no, you can't lecture to kids. Yes, you can. If it's done right, if it's participatory, if it's not just you going, wah, 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 then kids will listen and they'll become involved. And if you stir in the cool stories, if you stir in, here are things to think about. For example, the gold and salt trade in Africa. I can do that because we were just doing that in world history. And so I was talking to them about how valuable salt was. And they were like, well, how is it more valuable than gold? And I said, well, if you've got gold, you can die. You need salt to live. And if you've got gold and no salt, your gold's not going to do you any good. And I said, if you trace the history of salt, at one point, people were paid in salt. That's why the Latin word sal becomes salary. It's payment. And so all of a sudden the kid goes, oh, I never thought about that. Where words come from and where they evolve. So you can wind and weave that stuff in. But again, you got to read the books. Thank you, Mark Kishlinsky.
Well, if you look at it from the student's perspective, as you're weaving that stuff, I like to think that the students are, if they're really getting into it, they're unraveling. Like for them, they're trying to unravel these ideas. They do that by questioning and prompting you and I. And then you and I are there to help kind of guide them into those realizations, and not teaching them like what to think necessarily, but trying to help them learn how to think. And I agree with you. Without that background and foundation, it's hard to have deeper learning with that too. And I want to ask you a follow-up here, Keith, and that is on episode 16, I had a YouTuber that I highly respect that has a channel called Real History, and it's Jared Frederick, a professor. I got him on and I asked him about storytelling. I also had a fellow teacher in APUSH in Kentucky named Nelson Bodenbender, and I asked him the same question about storytelling. And I think this is a perfect time to ask you on this too, is how important do you think the art of storytelling, and along with participation, because you added a great component. You added the aspect that it's not just you like drudging on and like a lecture kind of thing, but it's more of an interactive lecture. But how important do you feel like storytelling is to teaching?
Vital. Doesn't matter what course you're teaching. You've got to pique student interest, and that comes with stories. They don't want to hear the boring crap. They want to hear stuff that interests them. And you're not going to get every kid every day to be interested in everything, but you can stir that pot every so often and go, okay, what about this? So I keep throwing these out now. Today is Columbus Day, Indigenous Peoples Day, whatever you want to call it. And so one of the questions that I ask both my AP World and my regular world kids, even my AP Euro kids, is, was Columbus's discovery of the Americas the beginning of a genocide? And one of the things I try and emphasize is, for Columbus and the Spanish, it was an accidental genocide. They did not want to kill the native population with disease. Now, they might have wanted to work them to death, but it was not disease that we weren't looking to wipe them out in the way that they were wiped out. And so, asking them to think about that as an alternate to, well, it's Indigenous Peoples Day and Columbus was just a jackass. Yes, he was.
Yeah.
But let's look at what his intentions were and what the conquistadors were trying to do. It wasn't wipe out the indigenous population in many cases. It was enslave them. And the fact that they kept dying was an inconvenience. And I try and make the kids see that. And it's, oh, okay. And then I pull up my little text chat with where I have, oh, yes, I'm going to continue to celebrate Columbus Day. Oh, how are you going to do that? Go to the grocery store and get lost looking for the spice aisle?
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, so it's the humor, it's the recognition, it's the understanding of a whole picture. I will not say I start my Columbus bit with hero or zero.
Yeah.
What do you want to think? The history hasn't changed, but our attitude towards him has. So things evolve.
Okay. Gotcha. And then, hey, I have one more follow-up question on teaching, because you had mentioned in earlier summaries to me that you said a great way on teaching is like you got to focus on how you deliver it, how to find balance, and how to entertain kids. And I had an interesting conversation with Jared Frederick about the balance of entertaining and the balance of engagement. And you had also touched base on engagement too. So like you said, you just tackled a pretty dark topic such as genocide, but especially if we move more forward into the future, because I think many of my students that live in Russellville, Kentucky, it's a predominantly white, a little bit of Hispanic, a little bit of Black area on there, but it's very hard for them to empathize what it would have been like to be an indigenous person. However, Keith, let's say we fast forward to the Holocaust, and I know you and I both taught the Holocaust before. What advice can you give us teachers as far as how do you balance the entertainment factor, but with the engagement factor? Because Jared was saying, like, with lighter topics like jazz age or sports or something like that, then sure, absolutely go in it with an entertainment kind of thing. Because me and you both teach with humor and whatnot. How do you approach a topic where maybe it's inappropriate to use humor into it, like the Holocaust? However, you don't want to lose the engagement factor. So how do you feel like, what would you advise teachers, or what do you do yourself when you reach those topics that are not only darker, but they're also, they're more humanized, because the students can see photography now and they see these faces and they see the look in a child's face in the camps, and they don't really see someone terribly different than they are. And I think it's easier for them to feel a connection there. How do you approach that and monitor how you engage them?
So I do, okay. I deliberately do a bizarre day where I teach the Holocaust sort of in a day. I've approached it and we've talked about some of the background, but I'll tell you exactly what the lesson looks like. The kids are forewarned. They have to get a permission slip Their parents have to sign it to say they are allowed to participate in this class. And so they're already sort of a little apprehensive about how weird it's going to be and what it's going to look like and all of that sort of stuff. So I lock my door so they can't get in. And I tell them they've got to show up on time. And so they're all outside and I sit by the door and I can hear them. And they're all muttering, and I'll wait 5-6 minutes past the bell until the tension has built enough. And then I open the door and I very quietly talk to them, very calmly. Okay, you're going to come in. You need to get rid of any gum, get rid of any food. You're going to put all your backpacks at the front of the classroom. You're going to leave your water bottles, and you're going to stand in the center of the room. And I bring them in, and I arrange the desks so that they're about the width of a cattle car. So they get that. Okay, so now you're standing in this space. Don't lean on anything. Stand upright. And I go through what it was like, how the Nazis rounded Jews up and said, we're relocating you, bring all your valuables and everything else like that. And I point to the backpacks at the front of the room. Okay, all your valuables. You've found them all. You've got them all for the Germans. They're never going to give them back to you. You've pre-done it. And they're like, oh. And then, okay, you're in the cattle car, describe the journey. I shuttle them down. So if you've got 30, 35 in a class, they're taking up a full cattle car. I make them take up about 6 feet. So they are packed in on top of each other. And then we talk about arrival and gas chambers and all of that sort of stuff and the horrors of that. Then I have them sit down and we talk about how Germany arrived at that point with the anti-Semitism and the Nuremberg laws and those sorts of things going into the Wannsee conference and the final solution. Mm-hmm. And then I show a video, and this is what they really have the permission slip for. It was a front line that was done in 1985 for the 40th anniversary of the liberation, that's the word, of the camps. And it's literally called Memories of the Camps. And it is footage shot by Allied soldiers as they went into these places. No special effects, not just hardcore stuff. And it's like 55 minutes. And kids leave that room in silence. And I can ask them a year later, do you remember the Holocaust? Oh, yeah. And so, it's a powerful, powerful lesson that's been developed over time. But there's no humor, but there's story and there's power in it. And they recognize that it's not your typical classroom experience that they've had in my room. And I think that's what leaves the lasting impression. And so if you can get into the way of, oh, this is what class is going to be like. And there are times when you go, no, this is going to be serious. There are times when it's fun and times when it's not. And that allows the impact of the more serious stuff to take hold within that atmosphere. I do the same thing with World War I. My grandfather fought in World War I and was shot and wounded. If you saw the movie 1917, that's where he was, quite literally. A week later, April 12th, I've got his letters. I read the letter that he wrote to my grandmother in the hospital, great-grandmother to his mother, because he was only 18. In the hospital, explaining what had happened to him and all of that sort of stuff. I've got a book that one of my relatives wrote about the family, my grandfather and his siblings, and how World War I impacted them. I'm a huge supporter of Poppy Day. So I wear my English style poppy come this time of year. And, I sell them within my classroom. If you want to make a donation, that money goes to veterans charities. And so, those sorts of moments, I say, okay, here's what's going. They recognize that this is the time to be serious and shut up and listen.
Yeah.
So you can build that into your classroom just based on your personality. It doesn't have to be boom, boom, boom all the time, every moment, all history. You can relax and have fun with it and let the kids enjoy it. And I think that's when the seriousness of some of the topics can be made even more effective.
Yeah. You know what? And on the AP European Facebook page, I've noticed this the last week. I'm sure you've seen it posted on there too. There's quite a few teachers doing role playing activities with like speed dating. I do like these speed dating things when they're role playing, and that's like you say, that's those more lighthearted moments. I think your activity for the Holocaust is incredible. Like that's definitely something that would resonate with the students. And the way you describe it is it's almost for new teachers that might be listening to this now or in the future is you have to kind of find a way to balance out the culture of your classroom, because it doesn't have to be like this rigorous drill sergeant like way of doing it all the time. You can find these lighter moments and these more challenging ones. But Keith, if you don't mind, I have one more philosophy question for you, just to wrap this part up, and that is consider the high stress environment that you and I have to teach in and the others in AP level class. What do you think are the most important qualities of a history teacher given the challenges that we have to deal with?
Patience. Simple as that. It's patience. Not especially, and this is going out to novice AP teachers. It's okay to be 6 pages ahead of the kids until you get the hang of it, until you've been through it a number of times and you start to know what the content is. Then, at early on, you're barely keeping your head above water. You're trying to read and get to know the content. You're trying to grade. You're trying to teach your other classes. It's the hardest job there is if you want to be good at it. But as you develop more and more comfort with content, particularly, that allows you to branch out and do all the other things. You can't get away without knowing content, especially in an AP class. I would say it is probably harder to be, if you're a first year teacher and you're being pushed into doing AP, I think that's doing students a disservice in many cases. You need to get some footing under you around classroom management, around content understanding, about how a school works. And you can't do that at the level that your AP kids should be learning at if you're a first year teacher. That's probably going to upset some people.
Well, it could be for a good reason, though, too. It could be meant for that. Okay, I have a technological question, too. And by the way, I agree, and it might be upsetting to people to hear that, but I do agree with you on that. I'm curious because, I met you through the AP European History Teacher Facebook page, and you were very kind to give me advice. I reached out to you for some advice on what kind of things to look for, how to post, how to help other people, but also how to get help from them. I guess, I mistakenly thought that you were one of the founders of that page. You told me you were one of the administrators, and you had helped to fill in for somebody that had left previously. So I guess my question could be more philosophical or sociological, and that is, especially for new teachers, like how valuable do you feel like the AP European History Facebook group has been? What value can it bring to a lot of new teachers or teachers like me that were experienced, but I had no idea the Facebook group existed until this last summer whenever I was in AP training, and then it was brought up on there. So for, I guess, new and experienced teachers, what value could be gained by joining a community like that?
So I am a firm believer in don't reinvent the wheel. And the Facebook pages, and I'm going to throw it out. There's an AP World. I'm sure there's an AP Gov. I would bet there's AP Geo. That I know there's a push. And so I would advise anyone who is just getting started in their AP career, join these groups. Most of them, I know AP Euro does this. We have a Google community, I would call it, a Google Drive network that you can access that has folders of so much stuff that you can take, you can discard. If there are areas where you're knowledgeable, you don't have to use it. But if there are areas where you are going, what on earth is this? Then jump into other people's stuff. And if you don't understand something, we had, I know there was one just the other day on the Stuart sandwich. And so I was like, okay, I can jump into this. I can tell you what I think and how I do it. And so, it's just, it's a great community, and people are always willing to share and help in any way they can. And so I would advise any new teacher to AP, any teacher that's new to teaching, if you get the opportunity, join one of these groups and access this stuff. There are teachers pay teacher sites and all of those sorts of things, but this stuff is free. Teachers are doing this out of the generosity of their own heart.
And from what I understand, Keith, that you're living it too. I think you're teaching AP World for the first time. How has that community helped you?
I joined that AP World History group right away. And it's helped quite a lot, because everybody's posting about where they're supposed to be, how they're doing, where am I time-wise. And so we're all sort of about the same spots. And people are going, well, what about this? I don't understand that. There was a question today on there about when does the caliphate end? You're dealing with Ottomans and Safavids and Mughals, and then which one's a caliphate, and what about the Fatimids in Egypt, and how important is that? Do you need, and so how much depth you need to go into, or how much you don't need to go into, is all there and available. And I think teachers in general are quite prepared to help each other out.
Absolutely. I'll tell you what, I've been in a lot of social media groups before, and not to say, Keith, that you and the other administrators haven't ran into your fair share of issues from time to time, but in the last, 3 or 4 months, and I've been pretty active on there, and I check it nearly daily. I can't believe how incredibly kind and helpful the community is on there, at least on that AP Euro group. People have questions, people are looking for classroom management or grading or feedback or ideas. I mean, people are so good about being not only like responsive, but very descriptive, and they'll reach right out to you. Some people will send you like a direct message and give you help. I'm almost like culture shocked by it. I think you saw like a week ago, I made a little bit of a small mistake that I learned from it. It's a good mistake. Like I posted an image of my desk in a circle. I was about to do my absolutism Socratic seminar, and I said in the post that, hey, just put your email below or send me a direct message. I expected like maybe 12 people. I think I had 164 emails that I had to send. So me and my teachers aides sat down and typed all the emails up on a spreadsheet, and I copied them and put them on the email and sent them. But I think I learned in that moment that, wow, I mean, I cannot believe that there was that much engagement. I think in the future I should probably announce that and then put it in the drive, like put it on the Facebook thing. So I even had like a little bit of a moment there where I had to learn from it. But like I said, it's just a testament.
You muted.
How long was I muted there?
Where you got to and then you went off on.
Was that a while?
Just about 30 seconds.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. So I think what I said there was that I kind of learned from a situation. My arm hit the enter button on the mute, but I think I learned that I could put things on the drive on there or on the files because I made that post about the Socratic seminar that I did under absolutism, and I told people they could comment in the comments or send me a direct email if they want to give me their email address. I'll send them everything that I have. And I kind of forgot that I could attach all that stuff in like a drive or something on there. And there was about 164 people that responded. So I had to, me and my teachers, they sat down and typed all those up and then copied them from a spreadsheet into an email and then sent them all. So I think I learned in the future is like, I probably need to put them in a location on that page where then people can access it and then direct them to it. But I was just mind blown, Keith, that of how much interaction there was. I expected maybe 12 people or something like that to say something, but there were so many people that was like, I love this idea, we'd love to do it. Or people, I like this even more. I had so many people that said, I do these and I really enjoyed them. And I can share with you my ideas, but also I'd love to hear yours. I'm like, how many places do you get that at? So I feel like even though we're a culture of beg, borrow, and steal from each other, we're extremely giving. And it's like you said earlier, don't try so hard to reinvent the wheel. You can pretty much get everything that you want. And I've always told new teachers that, don't be afraid to use stuff that other people has used the first few years you're going. And I say, like, kind of work on your own stuff as you go. Even if in the first year, if you make one lesson and one activity that's yours, well, if you keep doing that every year, you will build up a repertoire or like a portfolio of ideas that you can use in the future, and then maybe bestow those on the other people for help too. So I just appreciate people like you and the other teachers before I realized I was on mute there.
Yeah. No, I was just checking. We have 3.3 thousand members on that webpage.
That's amazing.
So
and the thing is, though, I feel like if I left AP Euro, if I ever went to teach something else, I feel like I would still stay in there just because it's just, you can get just so many great ideas that are not even just content, but just like activity ideas and other things like that, or just advice. Some teachers on there are just really good at giving advice in general, emotionally or philosophically or something like that. Okay, so Keith, if you're okay with it, I'd like to transition to our last 3 questions that are more about you as an individual and your growth, or if you're okay transitioning.
Yep, whatever you need to do.
But before we do it, is there any other thing that I maybe cut you off on, or that you wanted to say about the community, or did you feel like you were able to say as much as you wanted?
No, I've said as much. Are you kidding? All I've done is run my mouth here.
Oh, this is good, man. This is your show, man. This is all about you. So, okay. So anyway, let's go over towards growth and future trends for you. And I'd love to talk to you about. I've been teaching long enough now that I worry sometimes I'm going to become the get off my lawn teacher. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to become the old grumpy teacher thing. But I'm just like you in a way, though. That there are some trends and in history teaching and other things that are worrying. There's some aspects that are good, and there's also some that are worrying. So I guess I'll start with the first of the 3 questions on this is, in all of your ups and downs and your experiences, how do you stay so motivated and continue to grow as a teacher after years in the being profession, after years of being a quote unquote good teacher and being successful? How do you keep yourself humble? How do you stay motivated?
Well, I think as a 20-year teacher and being 60 years old, I'm 62. I'm at that get off my lawn age. I think I'm just lucky, and I think that's part of what keeps me motivated is the recognition that I'm fortunate that I have a job that I love. I have people that I work with that I enjoy spending time with. We literally, as a department, eat lunch together every day. The entire department, we have a 30-minute lunch break, and we sit in the office and we just shoot the breeze. And so, that's part of it. I have fantastic kids. I mean, again, very, very fortunate to be in a high-performing school district where kids are highly motivated. we have probably a 90+% graduation rate. We have probably 85% or thereabouts that go on to some form of higher education. So, it's easy to get up and go to work in the morning. It really is. I just love it.
And this is not me trying to peer pressure at all, because I love you have a very positively contagious attitude towards teaching. But now that you're in your 60s and you've had had years of teaching, do you feel yourself from time to time thinking more about retirement? Do you feel as though like, hey, that's not something on the horizon for me yet, I still feel really passionate? Or do you feel like even though you enjoy your job, you can see that on the horizon? You can kind of see, I guess, a conclusion to at least in the form that you're teaching now.
Yeah, I definitely, it's something that I think about. It's the hardest thing for me is not what happens in my classroom. It's everything that happens outside of my classroom. And I'm talking about the stuff that just gets thrown onto teachers over and over and over again. The expectations that we are all things to everybody, and the fact that we don't get treated as well as many of us should. We don't get the dignity that many of us should. And there are good reasons for that in some cases, but there are also reasons why teachers should be treated with dignity and respect. And we all saw that when COVID hit and parents had to deal with it. Their little angels weren't quite the little angels that they believed they were. And, for a fleeting moment there, it was, wow, I can't believe teachers can do the things that they do with 30 of these in the classroom. And, but very quickly that was forgotten. And we're back where we started, and you're seeing teachers being treated like dirt, and it's frustrating for many. I'm still very lucky that the parents, for the most part, are really, really good about how they treat us, what they think of us, what they say about us. It's our district administration that I fear about. And that's one of the things that always gives me pause. The fact that teachers are being asked to do more, old cliche, with less. And the frustration is they're always adding stuff. They never take anything off the plate. You have to do this and this and this and this. And it continues to grow. And the frustrating thing is that in order for us to not achieve what we are being asked to do, the kids are the ones that suffer. And so, again, those of us that are dedicated, that love our jobs, continue to do, because we know what will happen if we don't.
Yep. Continue to fight the good fight.
Yeah, well,
I suppose.
Yeah,
as best we can. I definitely, even with my frustrations, I feel like I'm at that point now where if I left, I feel like I would be fiscally irresponsible for leaving. But and then there's other times where I think, okay, if I'm not in this room doing what I love to do, then I worry for my students. I feel like I try to give them a valuable experience, and an experience that on most days they look forward to coming. It's like you said, you can't make every single lesson extremely exciting, but you just do your best on that. Now, this goes along with what you had just brought up there too, but maybe you can add a little bit more to it. Are there any trends that you've noticed emerging in the field of teaching history specifically, and specifically AP history, that you've noticed? And then in regards to those trends, how do they make you feel? Are there any that you're concerned with or excited about in terms of teaching history?
Well, the ones that I'm apprehensive about, and this revisionist view of history that, we've got to make everybody feel good about everything. No, you don't. I don't like the fact in history, here I am, Columbus, hero or zero. Yes, we can reinterpret based on new information, and I don't have a problem with that. But to say that slavery was not a bad thing, what are you smoking?
Yeah.
You can't say that slaves better off in the Americas than they were living in Africa. That's not true. You don't know that. Make an anticipation and say, oh, well, we gave them this, this, and this. Well, maybe you did. And maybe they'd have been happy in Africa without it.
Like the quinine argument, like, oh, hey, Europeans provided quinine to Africans, so maybe health standards went up. But then you look at the Belgians in the Congo and you're like, how could you justify that in any moral sense?
Yeah. And the idea that, slaves got 3 meals a day and a place to live. At what cost? What sort of life did they lead? And so, these trends that say, this is what you got to do. We can't hurt people's feelings. You can't make white people feel guilty. Well, I'm not trying to make you feel guilty. I'm imparting the information. You were not there, and neither were, so many people. There's a great, I wish I could remember the slide. There's a slave castle called Elmina in Ghana, and there's a plaque in the center courtyard, and it says the last line is, may humanity never perpetrate such evil on anyone again. And it's, may those who are here to find their roots find them, may everyone find forgiveness. And that's what you just got, you learn from it, but you move on from it. It's not about, and that scares me. And I see what's happening in Florida. And that scares me too, that we can't teach history factually because it's going to upset a parent.
And again, this is not me trying to use a joke about to make a political statement here. In a way, I've told my students in the past is that, I try to teach this history class honestly and thoroughly, but I also tell them, I was like, that's one thing to know, that I don't censor history, and I don't censor, and I also say that, history is not meant to be a safe space. You know what I mean? And I mean that in a way that, it's our job to provide them the factual information that happened in an ethical manner, in an interesting, engaging manner. And then it's up to them to be able to determine that. And I've always told my students before, especially as my class is predicated not just on seminars, but on the seminars with the encouragement of debate. So they're practicing forming arguments and making claims, supporting with reason and evidence on there. But I told them, I said, from time to time, you may feel yourself offended, but however, just because you're offended doesn't mean that you're necessarily right. And then sometimes you might be offended for a justified reason that you are, but to treat every controversial topic in history like you're walking on eggshells, I think is it's a mistaken strategy to take. I'm with you that too. I'm definitely on a concern with that. And I have a follow-up question. I know it's going to be purely a speculation question for you, Keith, but more of over the next decade. So whether you're still teaching or not, what do you see in terms of content and pedagogy, maybe even a little bit of what you were just talking about earlier, what do you see maybe evolving or changing in the next decade?
So one of the changes that I have implemented, and it's based on personal philosophy, we have a school system and style of providing evidence of student learning predominantly based on individual testing. And I don't think that that's a fair way of doing things anymore. Um, I was reading something the other day, and because I'm that much older than you, uh, the joke was always in math class. You have to learn how to do mental arithmetic. You have to be able to do your multiplication, division. You have to be able to add and subtract and do these things in your head, because you're never going to carry a calculator around with you, or a slide rule in my case.
Yep. Yep.
I've got a phone that does all that. And so I'm going to hit math teachers, for math teachers to say, okay, you can do this math test, but you can't use a calculator. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
No job, no position is ever going to say to you, yeah, we're not going to let you use the tools at your disposal to solve this issue. And
And maybe, Keith, the only way that that's justified is if the math teachers are told that on their standardized assessment, they're not allowed to use calculators. Now, and if that's the case, then the whole structure is corrupted from top to bottom.
yeah,
Then, because if you're pressuring teachers into doing just ignorant kind of policies like that, because of the way you're assessing the students, and that's out of their control, I think that's extremely disturbing.
yep.
For sure.
And so one of the things that I have started doing is, when my kids write essays, they collaborate. They turn one essay in for 2 students. Right?
That's a really cool idea.
The idea being that, again, in the real world, you are never going to be asked to, yes, I want you to work on this project, but don't get anyone's help on it, because that's ridiculous. Of course you're going to collaborate. It's what teachers do, for goodness sakes. We have professional development that is collaborative, and we're forcing students not to do. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So a personal philosophy, I'm having my kids write essays together. They can bounce ideas off each other. It gives them the power to discuss and delve a lot deeper than they would if they were doing it by themselves. I do make a hardcore point that, hey, you're working together, produce your own work. But, other than that, they have access to any source they want. Again, I do a lot of DBQ based questions in my regular world history classes. And so,
me too. Yep.
And so they're using, the evidence is there. And this is what I tell them. If you're writing a good DBQ, you are writing an essay for anything you are ever going to do. Because what is a DBQ? It is, we are providing you with the evidence. All you've got to do is provide a thesis and then write in the evidence to support an idea. Here's my argument. Here's my evidence to support my position. Here's the conclusion that I have drawn. In a sales meeting, you're pitching. Here's why you should use my company, use my product. Here's the evidence that I am promoting. You're doing a science project. Here's my hypothesis. Here's my experiment. Here's what I discovered. Here's my evidence. Writing a language arts thing on poetry. Here's what I think the author was writing about. Here's the evidence from the poem that makes me think that way. It's all the same. And so I think DBQs are a vital thing. Document-based questions, for those of you that don't teach AP. And collaboration works. I get far better essays from people working together than I do from individuals.
And do you feel like eventually, when you transition into individual writing, maybe like before the AP exam, are they more than likely performing better because they have collaborated previously multiple times with another student?
Absolutely. They recognize, oh, I should think about other people's points of view. Where is this coming from? How do I construct a good argument? And I found that it works really well.
Ken, Keith, I'm gonna add something here to you as well. Is that as far as my concern over the decade, and so I'm kind of seeing where you sit on this, because I would love to do a future episode if you're willing with you and some other teachers on this, because I feel like if it isn't an issue yet, it's slowly becoming one. I've seen some teachers kind of mention it on the Facebook page, and I've been starting to try to work on finding ways to harness it. So I think that especially over the next maybe 5 years, maybe not even 10, and that is the role of AI. So we're seeing AI make podcasts for you now instantly. They can make a YouTube video instantly for you. They can write papers for you instantly. So teachers like myself have been very quick to say no AI, no AI, plagiarism, blah blah blah. But I feel like if we're not careful, this could become another calculator thing, because I don't think that AI is just going to vanish. So
No.
I don't know, and I want to know how you feel about this. I feel like teachers like you and I, we better start trying to find ways to collaborate with each other to figure out how can we harness AI to help the students use it in an effective way rather than treating it like the bubonic plague. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
So I look at AI as a tool, and it's here to stay, and there's nothing you can do about it. And what I encourage the kids to do, because I know they're going to do it anyway, is if you're going to use AI to write an essay, it's the basis for your essay. It's an outline for what you're going to write. What I don't want is what AI writes. You demonstrate you understand it by writing it in your words.
Yep.
And again, if I'm very fortunate. I'm at the end of my career. Those of you that are beginning your careers, you're going to have to figure out how to differentiate between AI writing and your kids writing.
Yep.
And like I say, after 20 years of I know how my sophomores write. And so you put an AI written essay down in front of me, I'll be able to tell pretty quickly whether or not that's a sophomore or not.
Well, I have a feeling, Keith, that teachers like you and I think we already have a stereotype. I know that I've had it for a while with the kids, is that Malcolmson reads everything, because I try to stay away from busy work as much as I can. And I think that whether you like grading or not, or feedback or not, I think, like you said, you have to build that culture into your classroom where the students already know, hey, he is definitely going to read this and write on it. They've had way too many experiences where a teacher has either A, never given them the paper back, or B, they give it back to them with a grade or a check mark and no feedback. So imagine if you're a student, what would happen to your motivation and your quality of work if you felt like the work that you were doing, you're not really getting any feedback, constructive or not, on what you're doing. And I think that that's also led to problems. And I think COVID made that worse too. I think many of us felt like we had to pile the work up on the kids, and so much of the work felt so empty and like busy work, structured, because none of us knew what we were doing. The school systems were throwing online programs at students to do, and none of that had to be inspirational from the point of view as a student. And it probably just led to more burnout in general. So I think this is a great transition to something that you've hit on with me earlier, but I would love for you to hit on this for the listeners, because I feel like you're a strong proponent of this, and so many of our listeners could really benefit from it. And that is, why do you think feedback is so important? Like, how do you approach feedback on writing, and why do you think it's so important?
If you want a kid to understand material, information, how to construct arguments, even if they're not learning what's in your class, they need to learn something from your class. And so, like I say, constructing an argument, figuring out how to use evidence, all these things matter. But unless you tell them, here's what you did right in constructing an argument, or here's what you did poorly in constructing an argument, here's what's great about your thesis, here's where you missed it. If you don't give that feedback, you create bad habits. I'm going to go back to coaching. It's what I tell my kids. You have to practice on the practice field what you're going to do in a game. Habit forming exercise. So today we were working on checking shoulders in soccer. So what that means is you're receiving the ball, you're looking to see where your opponents are moving and where your teammates are moving at the same time. That has to be a habit. If you're going to make a good pass after you receive the ball, you've got to know what's going on around you. And that habit has to be part of your nature. And I think the same is true in writing. If you don't know what good habits are, what good writing is, I think using exemplars is a wonderful way of doing things. I usually show my exemplars afterwards, otherwise the kids will find them online and cheat. Constructive, timely feedback matters. I make it a point to try and get written work back in a week.
Yeah, me too. Yep. I think that's reasonable. Of course, I only have 30 students. I have 29 or 30. I met a teacher this summer. Her school is so big. I think she teaches 4 or 5 AP classes. She has over 100 students in her AP class. So I'm how does she do that? How does she give enough feedback?
Yeah, I have 2 world history AP, and they've both got 34 in them. Ooh. My AP Euro has 34 in it, and my 2.
Oh yeah, then you're right there. Then
yeah. So you have one of the things that you learn to do, again, as experience teaches you, stagger when you give assignments, stagger the homework, stagger. So my world history kids we're about to do conquistadors in Latin America. And so they are going to watch Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel. There's an episode about the conquistadors. It's on Ed Puzzle. I can tout that if you want to pull my version up. I think I've got it's a 55-minute video, and I think I have 34 questions on it, multiple choice. So while they're doing that, I can grade stuff. Again, this comes with, do you trust kids to do it? Well, if they don't do it, they're not getting a grade. And this is not something that I have to go, right, I've got to sit and watch them every moment. Your kid's making a choice.
Yeah, that's true. And again, especially at the age that you're teaching, they're at the age where they're mature enough and responsible enough to make those choices. So, Keith, I lied to you earlier. I know I said we had 3 questions left, and I've asked you like 6. I have to lie again just because I'd like to end on like an even lighter note. I know we had to kind of end on a little bit of a worrying note about the future of education, but I didn't know that you were also a movie buff like myself. So I also love movies. I'm going to have certain episodes where I'm going to have one of my good friends who's also a movie critic. We're going to be going through movies, and we're going to be doing Michael Collins soon. I've never seen the movie. I've always wanted to do that.
Michael Collins? What's
never saw it before. And I know they're going to have an anniversary edition, I think, released relatively soon. So maybe it was meant to be, but we're going to be doing episodes over that. And then I'm also going to be doing video games. Like I'm going to be doing like the history behind Red Dead Redemption, the history behind Ghost of Tsushima, just different things that get different types of people that are interested in things in history. Because I don't want the podcast to only be about AP Euro, only be about these things, although they help me a lot as a teacher to have you, but just history in general. I would love to have you on to discuss a movie if you're ever okay with that. In the future. But I have to know before you leave tonight, 2 questions, and then I promise this is it. The listeners are probably even going to be like, Jesus Christ.
Hour and a half in.
Well, yeah. We're in Joe Rogan territory now, so we're buckled up. So I have to ask you, I guess it'll be hard to say your favorite, but how about maybe an easier question would be one of your favorite. So what is one of your favorite history movies of all time? Just one of them, man. I'm not making you to pick it. Yeah, it's so again, it also could be a series. I should rephrase that. I mean, you have series like the Gettysburg 3-part series that was in a movie.
Yeah.
You have Band of Brothers and Pacific and things like that.
I don't speak U.S. history. Don't do that. Now I can't remember the Mission, starring Robert De Niro. As if you haven't seen it,
I have not.
It's a fantastic cast.
Okay.
Are you pulling it up?
Actually, no, I'm typing it on the Word doc right now. So whenever we're done, I'm going to pull it up on YouTube and then can I watch a trailer of it?
Okay, so it was made in 1986. And it's the story of a Jesuit priest in the jungles. I think it was set in Brazil, trying to convert the local native population to Christianity. Robert De Niro plays a slave trader who's trying to capture these people before they're converted to Christianity, because then they can't be bought and sold as slaves.
Yeah.
And he goes through a tragedy that results in him having to work with Jeremy Irons, who plays the lead priest, in converting these people to Christianity against other slavers. And it's a beautifully constructed movie. It's let's see, Academy Award for Best Cinematography, Roland Joffe.
I don't know why I cannot envision this movie right now. I know movies really well, but I cannot say that I've heard of this. Although maybe if I see like the trailer or a thumbnail, it'll resonate with me. No, I've never seen that movie poster ever. It's 1986. I was 3 years old when it came out.
I don't even want to hear that. So I mean,
that looks fascinating. We need to do an episode on that. Would you ever be willing to come back and do one over the Mission?
Sure.
Because I'd love to do world history too. Because I said to my listeners earlier that once I get done focusing on AP Euro this year, I'd like to expand to U.S. and world history topics too. Because I do teach general world history as well. So I'd like to make the podcast more of just general history and teaching later, not just only AP stuff. I think that it could benefit a lot of people. But yeah, thanks for that recommendation. And then one other last question, and that is one of the topics that I talked to Jared Frederick about on episode 16 was that he said something that I've always thought of, but I just never was able to put it into words. And he said it's very interesting to see how movies represent the time period that they're made in. So I would love to know what you think about that as a movie connoisseur, especially history movies. What do you also agree with that? And then what do you think that says about movies like, the fact that The Mission was made in 1986? Why 1986 of all places? Why was Saving Private Ryan, for example, like 96, 97, something like that? Like what does that say about the time period that the movie is made in? So not just the history behind the movie, but also the history behind that era, that decade that the movie was made in. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think sometimes that has something to do with it, but I also think it depends on like who is making the movie. How much power and influence does the director and the producer have within Hollywood at that time to get a vision? Maybe it's a movie that's been sitting in the background for 20 years that they've been waiting to make, and all of a sudden they've got the oomph behind them. They win an Academy Award or something, and now all of a sudden they can seize a pet project and go out and make it.
Oh, yeah, good point.
I don't know, you look at Tom Hanks and Saving Private Ryan, and you look at Band of Brothers, you look at the fact that he'd done Castaway and he'd done Apollo 13 and
you're right. Yeah.
So he had some oomph behind him. And so if he says, I want to go make a movie about World War II now.
Yeah. Very expensive movie too. A very expensive 10-part or 11-part series of that. And then also, I think him and Steven Spielberg were both executive producers. But look at Steven Spielberg's career in the 90s. Yep. I mean, you're talking about best director probably of the 90s, like as far as like notoriety and his success of the films he had. So you're right. Him and Hanks had a great deal of credibility going into the production of doing Band of Brothers. And I'm sure you know this too. Like, I think Steven Spielberg has a personal relationship with World War II as well too. I think it was his father. I think it was involved. It was your father, something like that. So I think that that was definitely one of those things that there was definitely a passion of Hanks and Spielberg's over time. But thank you for bringing that up, because I never even really thought about that too. Is not just the era that it's made in, but look at the individuals who are helping to make the movie. How do they feel about it? What's their motive or their intent that they have in doing it? That's really fascinating to consider.
I was thinking again, 1917, I mentioned it earlier because of my grandfather. That comes out on the 100th anniversary of. Same thing with They Shall Not Grow Old, which is absolutely phenomenal.
Love it. I've seen it twice.
I have my own.
Very good.
It is just jaw-droppingly brilliant, and that was done by the director of The Lord of the Rings, who had the notoriety and the oomph behind him, and a personal relationship because it was a tribute to his grandfather.
Yeah, that. No, I didn't know that last part. I didn't know that was his tribute to his grandfather. That makes it even more powerful, because I knew it was Peter Jackson, and I knew he had the notoriety. I was always a big Lord of the Rings fan and big Tolkien fan, but I didn't know that he also had a personal connection with it as well. That makes a lot more sense how he was able to do it. And I love that sort of movie / documentary, because I think it further humanizes these people from the 19-teens, because our students see that old film that's all sped up and it looks kind of cartoony the way people were moving. But then when you watch that footage that's been remastered and colored, all of a sudden when I show clips of it to my students, it seems like, especially with the sound and everything else that's been done with it, it makes it feel like it was last year rather than feel like it's that long ago. And I think for history teachers like you and I that both love movies, like I love showing movie clips in class. I try to do as much as I possibly can. Jared Frederick was a big proponent of that too when I was talking to him. I had to love opportunities, because that's the first thing I nerded out about when I first saw the trailer of They Shall Not Grow Old. The first nerdy thing I thought of was, oh, hey, I could use that in class. It wasn't just the fact that I can go watch it. It was that, hey, I could use that as a teacher. But anyway, I think this is a good place to wrap up. I think 1 hour and 37 minutes. And this has been my longest podcast. But back in the day whenever I did a philosophy podcast back in the day, they were this long and stuff too. But Keith, I've really appreciated you spending your time here, because people need to know that you've taught all day like me, but you've also had to coach soccer and then come to do this. So you've sacrificed time for yourself and your family by just being on the podcast tonight. I would like to just give you a moment. Do you have anything lastly you would like to say to the listeners before we close out tonight?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to spout my own garbage. And know that it is that. Everyone's different. Every teacher has their own bits and pieces that they're good at. And know that, again, teachers, students, everyone that listens, that each one of you is going to be affected differently by different stuff, just as you will be affected differently by the history, this podcast, whatever happens to you. It's going to have a different impact, and everyone will experience it differently. But you got to make the most of the opportunities that are afforded.
Yep, I agree. Well, thank you, Keith, for agree with you, and then I hope that you had a good experience for your first time, and I hope you're willing to come back in the future as well. We can dive into some topics, maybe some movies, maybe have another teacher join us and whatnot too. But I had a great time in the podcast. But for our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to episode 30. And I hope that all of you have a great week. And as always, be contagious.